Can you open the door for somebody else?
Welcome, everybody, to the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. We're joined today with Melissa and Dr. Bob. You're like, where are you going with that?
This is Peaceful Vaccine Talk with Melissa and Dr. Bob.
This is meditative anti-mandate discussion.
Pro-informed consent. Oh, my. You know, I thought of a term for the other side.
Yeah.
Vaccine injury deniers. Because that's probably the key of this whole fight.
Right.
That's like the thing that angers our side the most, is that they just deny it happens. And
deny and move on.
Yeah.
Deny and move on.
You're totally right.
All these parents are just making it up. We just want something to pin it on. We're just making it up.
Okay. Here's your
thank you. And you have a new treat today to share with the audience.
Is the cookie dish one of those magic dishes that, like, if I hand it back empty, it'll come back to me like filled up again with something?
Negative. No.
Oh, dang, I was hoping. But yeah, you bring me a muffin. Thank you.
You're like my kids that it's never good enough. Like, you'll be like, can I have 5 minutes to play? You give them 5 minutes and they want more.
Yeah.
Or can I have one cookie? You give them one cookie and they need more. It's like there's never a point where they go, thank you, I am satisfied with what you have given me and I am content. Never.
And so my oldest kid's first 2-word phrase ever was 2 cookies. Was the first 2 things he ever said together.
I think I remember you saying that. Yeah.
Did I say,
I think you said on the podcast because they were always allowed 2 cookies, right?
Yeah. So it's I guess that stays in my mind because it's
this muffin is grain free.
Did you make it?
Yeah.
Oh wow, because it's in like a Starbucksy kind
I bought those paper bags so that no plastic.
So the bowl did come back to me with
there
something.
You go.
In it. Right.
You put it out there. So this is a banana chocolate chip. It's what I do for the kids' birthday cakes and things. That if you've had those, so Simple Mills.
I had the birthday cake once. There's another time I didn't.
There's another time you were trying to have us cut it before it was cake time, so you could get cake before you left.
I had to leave the birthday party early, and I thought, sure, she'll just cut me a piece of the cake out of the corner, right? And
like, honestly, guys, he wanted me to cut the birthday cake for a child. We haven't had the photos or any of those things yet, right? He just wanted me to cut a piece of it out before he left so he could get some, and then we could just resume and go back to celebrating the cake. But that was
Cheryl let me know that
was a hard pass.
Not okay. Yes. This is good. Thank you.
Okay, so Simple Mills is a company that if you guys are doing grain-free cooking and baking, and I know this is not vaccine related, but many of us are really working hard on a holistic level with our kids and the foods that we put in their system, especially those that have had vaccine reactions and their bodies are healing. They have to be really careful what goes into their system, and that affects their behavior as well as physical ailments.
Yeah, so paleo eating is you don't have to be super strict, but that sort of lifestyle, it goes a lot towards healing the immune system.
That's right. And it's an immune system and the gut. And
so it is about vaccines.
So it does tie back into that. And so the reason I've even gotten into grain-free and gluten-free with my daughter was because of what happened with her vaccines and her stomach issues that she had. So Simple Mills is a company that many of you will be familiar with, perhaps if you've been doing this, but it's a almond flour-based, pre-packaged muffins, cupcakes, bread mix, and cookie mix and whatever. Now, the cookies and things, they have coconut sugar, so they will have more sugar than I tend to like to give my kids. So I'll make, my own grain-free chocolate chip cookies, but their bread mix is great. Out of the cupcakes, I really like the banana, which is what I did for you. And then I added dark chocolate chips to it. And we use pasture eggs and water, and that's it. It's so easy. The kids can help you with it. And much better than the kinds of things that we see out there for snacks. So I encourage you to check them out. They have great crackers too.
Yes, they do. And even more exciting, can I talk about the song? You haven't talked about the song on the podcast.
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with the banana chocolate chip muffin.
I know, but
you're like, speaking of muffins, can I talk about the song?
No, that's what I wanted. This is the first podcast we've done since we released the song, and I've been so excited about it. So I just want everyone to know, if you didn't see the Facebook post, Melissa, after much prodding from me and begging from me to have her do this, she put the "Be the Peace" theme song onto iTunes and Spotify and just wherever you would download your music. It's Be the Peace. It's the Vaccine Conversation podcast theme song. And your name is, you're actually not, you're Melissa Suzanne, right?
That's that's my first and middle name.
Yeah, that's your kind of your performer name. And so everybody, you no longer have to like listen to the first part of the podcast and then fast forward to the end and like just play it over and over again.
Pretend it's the whole song.
I know. There is actually 2.5 minutes of very good song in the middle there that you've never gotten to hear. And so download it, listen to it, sing it with your kids. And what I love is it kind of gives back to Melissa a little bit as an artist, and it helps support that part of your life and your vision and your mission and just what you really love to do most probably is sing, and so I love that. I don't know if every single, okay, so we're going to just pause the podcast so you can open your your music app and search. Melissa's still recovering from her illness. Search, Be the Peace, Melissa Suzanne, or Be the Peace vaccines, and I think sometimes it shows up under albums, not individual songs, because it is like it's listed as an album, even though it's one song.
Got it.
But you know what? $1.29 on iTunes, small price to pay for a really amazing song you can listen to over and over again, and then help say thank you to Melissa for being Melissa. So there it is. And this is all me. When I first heard the song, I totally thought I was already listening to podcasts, listening to a lot of podcasts, and the catchiest podcast to me had a really nice little opening tune and then kind of just some music, and then they'd fade out, at the end of the podcast. I thought this song is so perfect for that. And so, the first time I heard it, I was already thinking podcast song, and then
meanwhile, I was like, no, not happening. No, thank you. And people know this, so I am a singer, but in this movement, I do something else. And so I'm often asked to sing places or events can you sing at this event that is to do with this movement? And it's really hard for me to say yes to that. Only a rare circumstance would that really seem to fit for me, because it's like two different hats, and people that are both left and right brain might understand what I'm saying is it's a whole different persona of what you need and a skill set that you need and a mindset you need to be in.
Yeah.
And so I don't really mix the two very often. So I did not want that song on there because I'm I don't want to promote myself. This feels so, I don't like self-promoters that I see.
And you're not, and you never have been.
I know,
so I'll do it for you.
But I'm always afraid somebody's going to think that they're going to think that.
You're right. Yeah.
So that's kind of why I've always stepped back on it. And he's been bugging me for a while to get it up on iTunes. And so it's been you've been asking me about that for at least 6 or 7 months. I finally did. It's up.
Yeah. And you're you're such a humble person when it comes to that. When it comes to your life as a performing artist, you're so humble about it, which I appreciate. It was interesting to see, you're such a good singer, but you're so humble about it. You're not like this star that goes around, knowing they're an awesome singer. You're just Melissa Floyd, who does podcasts and activism, and you also sing.
And my other life as a
very
singer.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think most mothers out there will understand that once you become a mom, whatever identity that you had before motherhood just sadly disappears. It doesn't mean to happen that way. It just does. So sometimes you sort of forget who you were and what you did before becoming a mom. And we have to really focus on bringing that back and remembering who we were so we can nurture that, because that's part of us. And music is fulfilling to me. And I remember the very first time I sang again after Serenity, and I was thinking, well, maybe this is past. This is okay. Maybe I did this. I've been singing since I was 13. Maybe this is a closed chapter. And then the very first time after I was done singing that one song on stage, I was like, it's not gone for me.
Yeah,
it was still there. And when I had that, I said, I've got to, whatever context I can do this, I need to keep doing this because it does feel fulfilling. And I have to remember, oh my God, I was a singer before I was a mom. That's right. And I think a lot of us women and women listening out there, have been in that circumstance where they've felt that. So, I'm trying to get back to that now. Have new stuff. Remember I told you my new songs.
Yeah.
I have some new songs I'm working on. And so there's part of me that goes back, but that's just unrelated to what we sort of do here. Every now and then I share videos on my page, but that's about it. But I'm so excited that we are in this new season too, because I just absolutely love the direction we're going with it. And oh my gosh, the amount of comments and messages that I have gotten about season 2 and that I've seen, everybody is really, really liking the depth of topic that we're bringing to it, and the depth of interviews that we're bringing as well. And
we're still going to do some regular topics, of course. We'll cover the rest of the diseases. And we still have a list of sort of like regular vaccine topics we have to cover. You have like aluminum and
but even
and
that
conflict
will be able,
of interest, and
we can do some of those intertwined interviews
with
that we can do in depth,
the
right?
aluminum
So
researchers. So it'll all, and it'll all, come together, and it'll never end, right? So what do we have today?
Okay, so you guys, one of the things I'm really interested in is finding old media articles that talk about vaccine injury. And many of you that were around for California's 277 fight 4 years ago have seen a shift in the way the media covers this issue just in the last 4 years. The way they cover it now, they hardly ever tell a story of vaccine injury. They hardly ever show the other side in any way. So even in just 4 years, we've seen a big shift in how the media has covered things. They will never admit vaccine injuries in an article. They will never talk about deaths from vaccines. Those things aren't discussed. And so I thought, and I've talked with different reporters about how it's changed. And so I kind of thought there are a lot of great older articles, and I have 10 more of these at home that I haven't even shown you yet. A lot of great older articles that discuss vaccine injury in a completely different way than we hear it today. And so I wanted to revisit those and bring some of those up and read them and actually go through. Today we have 2 different articles, one from the LA Times and one from the New York Times. And these are both written in 1986. And this is all specifically dealing with the bill, the 1986 bill for the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that bill. We'll have a separate podcast that kind of goes into that. But I think a lot of people maybe are not completely educated on what that bill really was and how it was part of a grander scheme of bills, and how the vaccine portion of that bill was just one element that was sort of added separately. And there were a lot of people that weren't really on board with this that you would think should have been. And so it was pretty interesting. So we found 2 different articles by we.
She means
me.
her.
Because like I'm the one that goes on the computer at night.
No,
like this
and
is
you
just
love
not,
that.
it's not you said it's not really your thing, not something you really enjoy. And I can't get enough of I love finding little rare gems. So the first thing I say we go through is the LA Times article.
Okay.
So this LA Times article was October 20th, 1986, and it's called Vaccine Injury Fund Bill Approved but Faces Veto. Okay. So this was based in Washington. And this says that this is legislation that would create a compensation fund for vaccine injured children. So remember, at this time, there were a lot of DTP vaccine injuries that were happening, and parents were suing the pharmaceutical companies. And they were suing and winning cases for multi-million-dollar settlements. The pharmaceutical companies came back to the government saying, we are losing our profits. This doesn't make sense for us anymore. We need to have removal of liability, or we will potentially stop making vaccines altogether. And that fear-based idea was sort of what sold this bill. The idea that we are going to be without vaccines completely. Right. Nobody's going to make them. And that's it. In fact, Henry Waxman, who was the Democratic representative out of California, actually even says, I sure hope if the president vetoes this, which is President Reagan, he's like, I sure hope he has a plan to start making vaccines himself, because there's not going to be anything.
Right.
Which is such a silly thing to say.
I know. It's and this article almost seems like it was politically motivated to put pressure on the president to sign the bill.
Right.
And they have I think every quote in here is kind of targeted towards that agenda. But yeah, it is interesting how they really have to play off the fear of, oh my gosh, what would happen if pharmaceutical companies had to suddenly stop making all vaccines. And this was just polio, DTP, and MMR back then. We had stopped using smallpox vaccine, and so this was only a few vaccines. But even just the sheer thought of of them stopping vaccines altogether so almost would unleash a panic across America. People couldn't even believe what that could possibly do to our health, and they were so afraid of it. And in reality, they didn't have any research on whether or not that would be a bad thing if all vaccines had to suddenly go away. So they just assumed it would.
And there was urgency. Right. They were trying to make it like this has to happen now or else.
Right.
And the reason I think talking about these media articles is so important is many people will go, vaccine injury I've never heard anything about it in any news thing. And in today's world, when they're not covering it and people who only believe facts based on what they see in today's media, I want to target and look at this older media. We're talking about the same media, and how they talked about it at a time before it was essentially censored. So if, in fact, vaccine injuries don't happen, then they wouldn't have happened in 1986 either. And yet they're talking about it right here in black and white, and this was directly in the newspaper multiple times. And so one thing I find really interesting is that this article, again, from the LA Times, says that the HHS, this is Health and Human Services, was against this bill. And they're against this bill because they said, quote, "This is likely to do little to assure the vaccine supply." But wasn't that the whole argument that they were selling it for?
Right.
Saying this is what it'll do. It'll assure the vaccine supply. HHS is saying this bill's not going to do anything for that. And then it's also saying it's not going to improve our immunization efforts. Now, why didn't they feel it would improve immunization efforts? They were afraid bringing attention to vaccine injury would reduce the faith in the vaccine program because now they are essentially admitting kids are hurt, and we set up a fund and a program for those kids that are hurt. So we have the representative from the HHS actually saying this is not going to improve our vaccination rates, and it's not going to make sure the vaccine supply is better. So then you look at that quote and think, well, then what in the world would somebody be encouraging the president to pass this for? What would be the reason for this then?
Right.
It didn't really make sense.
Right.
And I just want to, I'm sorry, I did just get over a sickness, first time in 2 years, and I'm very bitter about it. And yes. So if I cough, I apologize. The thing that I think is most important for people to understand is kind of to understand what an omnibus bill is and how this was a part of that. Okay, so I just want you to, I'm going to break down, and I wrote these down. Bear with me, Dr. Bob, as I do this. Don't fall asleep, okay? I hope I get a review that says you think facts are boring. I hope I get one of those reviews. Guys, please stop sending me reviews saying that I'm criticizing disease episodes. I'm teasing.
No, it's so
I'm
funny.
Joking.
Whenever we get new listeners, and so they'll listen to the first 5 episodes and then write a review. I bet if people could go back and rewrite their reviews, they probably
I'm totally
would.
joking, you guys. I don't think disease episodes are boring.
I know.
Everyone
knows that now, but the first listeners won't
everybody.
hear this until they get to this episode. So you might as well.
Okay.
Not even try,
all right. So an omnibus bill. So an omnibus bill is a proposed law that covers a number of diverse or unrelated topics. Okay. So what the 1986 bill was, it was a group of bills. Some things were unrelated. And let me tell you what they were made up of. The first was a compensation program for vaccine injured children. That's the thing that we know the 1986 bill to be about. The second thing, and this is, I think, kind of important, this part of the bill said that pharmaceutical drugs could be exported to other countries, even if they were not approved in the U.S. first. Okay, so what President Reagan said about this was going to help the United States pharmaceutical industry become a global force. Mm-hmm. And that's such foreshadowing to me, because think of what that did in 1986 to give so much power to the pharmaceutical industry and the pharmaceutical lobby that has since shaped so much of medical bills, medical laws, and the kind of things that we're fighting right now. All because in this bill in 1986 that we think was just about vaccine injury actually was giving more power to pharmaceutical companies to become bigger and the U.S. pharmaceutical companies to become more global without even safety testing in the United States first, which is interesting. The third thing was of this bill was addressing chronic mental illness. And so it was providing medical, psychiatric, and psychiatric care, housing and employment to those who had chronic mental illness. There was also a part of this bill that talked about physicians being able to take disciplinary action against other physicians. Again, this is all these things are very unrelated, but the point I'm making, when you see all these things being part of it, signing the bill meant signing all of it.
Yeah.
And not signing it meant reducing and eliminating all of it. And so the way that they set this up was throwing something in there last minute to get approved. Everything had to get approved. And the last part was they wanted to set up a national commission that could reduce infant mortality. So there were 5 main things, maybe even 1 or 2 more that were never really talked about, that were kind of smaller, that were part of this omnibus bill that included the vaccine compensation program. And I just want people to kind of know a little more about it so that when they say, repeal the 1986 law, like that bill like covers so many different things. And maybe what we're looking for is not repealing the fact that there's a program, but removing the removal of liability or reinstating liability for pharmaceutical companies.
Right. And this whole story mostly seems to focus on the fact that they're creating a compensation fund, via a tax on vaccines. And they're creating this way for people to get compensation for their injuries. So we won't have skyrocketing prices. We won't lose the vaccine supply. It seems like they minimize the idea that they're taking away liability from pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
That was very hush hush.
You're right. That wasn't even a big part.
Because I mean, they're almost making it seem like this amazing thing, this amazing program that's going to help everybody, and. People back then, they were as intelligent as we are now. And, people 200 years ago were just as intelligent. I mean, they knew, they had to have known that taking away liability from pharma would take away all incentive for vaccine safety research. They had to have known that back then. And they don't even address that here. They don't even bring that up. That's not even discussed out in the open. And that kind of, that's unfortunate. But it's really interesting. I mean, this whole article is basically people saying why it's going to be a good bill, and then people saying why it's not going to be a good bill. And no one even brings up the problem of pharma liability. What they're saying is this bill is going to be too costly. It's going to cost the taxpayers too much. It's going to cost everyone too much. Well, it doesn't cost the government anything.
That's true.
It doesn't cost the pharmaceutical companies anything.
You're right.
The people pay for it.
Right.
Because every vaccine you get, every vaccine that you buy, 75 cents goes into this fund. So it doesn't cost them a penny. And they use this whole fund to basically, fund the whole program. And there's billions of dollars in this fund. And in fact, I think I read somewhere in here that the interest that they earn on the fund is used to pay off all the compensated injuries.
Right. And that means all the remainder of that is
just in this fund.
Yeah.
So there's this huge billions of dollar fund just sitting there gaining interest.
Right.
And they're not actually paying any money out of it. They're almost just funding it from the interest that they earn.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? So again, this is the LA Times article, right? It says, they say in this LA Times article, because these victims receive no compensation in any other way, when their kids have these injuries, they have to go to the courts to get the manufacturers responsible. And so even just something so simple like that, understanding these are victims that exist. That was a statement of fact.
Right.
The victims exist and they're not receiving compensation. They're being injured and have medical bills and costs and lifetime care. And they're not able to get care for that unless they sue these companies. So this is just a matter of fact thing, right, that they're mentioning. And what Henry Waxman says, so to know more about him, is he is the chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health, again, a Democrat from Los Angeles.
He's the author of the bill.
The author of this measure of the bill.
Measure,
He says, this bill is the first step to taking care of children hurt in the process of protecting society from epidemics. This is the idea of the greater good and collateral damage. He basically is saying, we are going to have this aspect of this bill to take care of the hurt children. Is he saying to take care of the children whose parents claim were hurt by vaccines? Right. Is he saying to take care of the rare one person that may have a side effect, 1 in a million? No. He's saying we know there are children that are hurt. This portion of the bill is to take care of the children that are hurt. And these children are hurt in the process of protecting society. So when you look back at California and what just passed with 276, SB 276, this idea that kids have paid the price of protecting society from epidemics, like Henry Waxman says, and they have been hurt in the process, and that he's talking about taking care of those children. So what does California do to those children that have been hurt in the process of protecting society? They kick them out of school and they discriminate against them and they segregate them. So we're talking about the difference, you guys, in how they view and discuss and talk about the climate of vaccine injury. This is in black and white in the LA Times. It's as clear as can be. Children are being hurt. We need to take care of the children who have been hurt protecting society. Where was that discussion? In the Senate Health or the Assembly Health Committees during 276? Was any single legislator outside of the few that had supported us, any of these legislators, were they saying, you know what? All these people that come for public comment that talk about their vaccine-injured children, we need to find a way to take care of them because they did what they were told to protect society. And so it seems like something so simple, but it's not, because they're claiming this as a truth. And this would never be in an article today.
I know. And what is similar to today, though, is they do kind of downplay the numbers. They say, it would establish a trust fund for families of the several dozen children who annually suffer severe reactions to these vaccines. And so, I love what you're saying, that they are acknowledging that these are severe reactions to these vaccines, not claimed reactions, or not adverse events that coincidentally happen after vaccines. They are vaccine reactions. But, we know there are way more than several dozen children who annually suffer severe reactions. I mean, there are 2,000 severe reactions reported in the VAERS database every year, and that's only 1 to 10% of what actually happens. So we know there are 2,000 that are actually reported, all across America. Yeah, even back then, they're back here. They're claiming there's only several dozen.
Right,
children.
But why are they claiming that? Because the HHS representative says directly before that this bill is not going to improve our childhood immunization efforts. The more they draw attention to the children that have been injured, the less the confidence in the program.
Yeah, so they say it's okay. There's only several dozen that are injured, so it's such a small number that's okay. It's not going to interfere with everyone's, people aren't going to be afraid of vaccines.
And one thing I found interesting is the Assistant Attorney General at this time, his name was John Bolton, he says, quote, while it is undisputed that there is a small handful of children who may suffer serious adverse effects from being vaccinated. Okay, before continuing this, undisputed.
Right.
He is the Assistant Attorney General.
So where did that all go? I mean, why?
Where did that go? Yeah. How come Senator Pan is not talking about that and the other people bringing legislation to these states? Why are they not discussing that it is undisputed a small subpopulation of children may suffer serious adverse effects from being vaccinated? He said that. And it's in black and white and something that you would never see at this point.
Right, and they specify earlier on what are those severe reactions. They include the three most severe devastating reactions. They say mental retardation, disability, and even death.
Yeah, I mean, think about that being in an LA Times article today, saying that reactions to vaccines, including mental retardation, severe disability, and death. Yeah. Death would never be mentioned. Do you remember Senator Pan saying, thankfully, it wasn't during the hearing, but he said somewhere somebody caught on video, thankfully no one has ever died from a vaccine.
Oh, jeez. Because they're safer than water. Right.
Which is the real danger to people. Yes. And so this is the time when this bill was coming out that they decided that they would put a compensation cap of $250,000. Now, at the time, that was $250,000 for all vaccine injury claims. So that later goes on to be $250,000 for death, but it could go into the multi-millions for a lifetime of care. And the reason that they changed this was originally it was $250,000, but then you would be allowed to continue trying to go after the manufacturer on some level. Right. They changed that, and now they let the settlements be more accurate to what a lifetime of care would actually cost. And then it does talk about the tax. You know, what I found interesting too is that the tax was not signed into the bill at the time the bill was done.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
I didn't know that. They had no funding mechanism for this bill when it was originally written. And everyone just kept saying, well, don't worry, the next Congress, next year Congress will figure out a way to pay for this bill. And maybe that's why some of the people were objecting to the costs of it. That makes sense now.
But isn't that what everybody does? This isn't handled, but vote yes anyway.
Yes.
And we will work it out later at some other date with some other group of people who have not done their due diligence on this.
Yes.
Let's just sign it and we'll iron out the kinks later. I was actually told this from a chief of staff in an office in California during this last bit of 276. We will work this out after the law is in place. There is no logic to that.
Right.
But then the law is already in place, and it's in place in a way that is not clear, or it's not accurate, or it's wrong. How do legislators vote things and sign things and say yes to things and expect for the kinks to be worked out later? I feel like that is absolutely unprofessional and against what should be their code of conduct for how to participate as a representative to the people. We expect if there's a law, we want all those kinks ironed out way before you sign it.
I know.
We don't want you figuring this stuff out way after the fact. And I almost said a bad word, and you would have had to, bleep me or go back and edit me. You're welcome, guys. That was the G-rated version. But yeah, so the other health-related items that I mentioned, part of the omnibus bill, are a big part of understanding why he said if the president fails to sign this, he will have to veto all other measures. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised how there was a lot of opposition to having the vaccine injury compensation program as part of it. There were a lot of people that were not on board for that I thought was surprising, including President Reagan, who actually said he was afraid that this was going to be a no-fault court. This was going to set up a terrible trend for not having proof.
Right, but we don't necessarily know his reasons, because the article doesn't really clearly state what his reasons are to object. Yeah.
This one? No, I have read that outside of this, not just this article.
Yeah, but... well, I'm looking forward to interviewing, hopefully, Barbara Lowe Fisher, who is actually actively involved way back. Sorry, Barbara, way back then. When this was being done, and was kind of part of this movement that saw this bill passed, and part of the movement that had to realize to their horror that farmer liability was being taken away because that was not part of the original intent of this bill. So then there's should I read the title of the next article?
Sure.
Just so people can Google search these, and we'll put links to these articles on our Facebook page and on our website, as we always do. I love I got to laugh. Sorry. Our latest review on the podcast. I love the podcast, but could you please post links to all the articles you talk about somewhere so that I can track them down? That's because they're a new listener. They don't realize we didn't say.
How about on the episode description? There's an idea. Oh wait, there is a link there, guys.
So people now people know there are links, but when you first listen, we don't talk about it, and we didn't.
We should have a rule. You cannot review unless you've at least listened to 30 episodes of season 1 before you can review.
Or I can record a public service announcement and edit it into the first episode. Anyway, so the second one is Reagan signs a bill. So now, the first article was before he signed it, threatening to veto. Now it's Reagan signs bill on drug exports and payment for vaccine injuries. This was the New York Times, November 15, 1986. So this is then after the signing.
How old were you at the time this was happening? 1986?
86, 69. I was 17 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you were 7 years old.
You were almost an adult.
Yes, I was.
You were on the verge of being an adult when this bill got signed in and sort of led in a direction that your life would later lead into, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, way back then, this was not on my radar at all. I had no idea. I was 17 years old, but I don't even remember hearing about this or it being in the news. But this was probably such a huge deal to everyone who was in the movement back then.
I was 8 years old at the time.
Yeah.
life was easier back then when you're 8. But yeah, so this one again, talks about the same bill, the same thing. And again, they talk about how this bill is about compensating children injured by vaccines. That is with a period, you guys. It is a statement. It is listed as a fact. This is not an urban legend like the way they write about it now. To compensate children whose parents claim they were injured by vaccines. That's how it would be written today.
Right.
But what they are saying in this time, black and white, just report the news, is that President Reagan today signed a health bill designed to compensate children injured by vaccines. And he talks about the other provisions of the bill, which allowed the pharmaceutical companies. And like I said, President Reagan said, quote, "This new law will increase the competitiveness of the American pharmaceutical industry." And what's funny is I bet many people listening are like, oh, that's when everything went wrong. You know, when you have this, our American pharmaceutical industry has just gone out of control, completely out of control. They have gotten their lobby and the lobby's hands inside every single piece of legislation that has to do with obviously promoting vaccines, eliminating medical exemptions. They have been a big part of changing the narrative about this quote unquote fringe group that has concerns and questions as parents about the vaccine schedule. They have put hundreds of millions of dollars into advertising campaigns, and the pharmaceutical industry did not need to become more competitive at that time because it has just absolutely taken on a mind of its own. And many of us are suffering as a result, including some that have been injured or killed from pharmaceutical products and prescription drugs, or others that have permanent conditions and things as a result. I mean, it's a big issue.
Yeah, and you would think that the pharmaceutical companies, I mean, their lobbyists probably went, to the legislators and said, we want to keep helping people. We want to keep helping the sick and preventing disease. We want to keep making vaccines. But these DPT and these MMR vaccine lawsuits are killing us. They're killing our profits. We can't profit this way. So, but we want to keep helping people. And they probably, that was probably a very easy sell. I mean, they probably sell that to any legislator because they're not going to think the extra step. Oh, we're taking away your liability, and now you have no reason to make them safer. What you were just saying made me realize I just saw this on Facebook, although it's like 3 years old. It was an article. Big Pharma CEO says in quotes, "We're in business of shareholder profit, not helping the sick."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it's this CEO of a pharmaceutical company, and he's just saying the most awful quotes. He's like the most hated man in America now because he's admitting to this. He says his company's responsibility is to its shareholders, not the customers who rely on his drugs to live. We can do anything we want to. We will continue to make acquisitions, acquiring other companies, raising drug prices. Again, because we will act in accordance appropriately the way we assume our shareholders would want us to act. And it's all about, for them, it's all about the bottom line. And we've said that before, but this is the CEO of a pharmaceutical company actually, I don't know why he would do this, in public and be quoted this way, but he's admitting to it. They, in reality, were not there to make vaccines safer. Even though they pretended they were not there just because they felt like they wanted to help humanity. Is basically they were there to keep selling their product and not have this huge liability. And I've always said before, after we passed this, and then pharma kept donating millions and billions of dollars to legislators for the last 30 years. Now legislators are returning the favor again by mandating pharma's products. And that's where this is going. And that's why this is so wrong. And we're taking you back 30 years. But the problem is just as big. It's even worse today.
And I think the majority of not just our listeners, but the American public would agree the pharmaceutical industry is too big and they are too present in our lives today.
Yes.
I think the average American person would agree also that pharmaceutical companies are profit-based, and there is a risk that they may be choosing profit over people.
Right.
And so it's always funny when you do hear people agree with that and not understand that that bleeds over to vaccines, because these are the same people making vaccines. It's not something new with vaccines. It's just par for the course. It comes down to reducing negative media or negative attention and damage control, and just promote, advertise. And one thing I thought that the New York Times said in this article that was interesting is they said that President Reagan signed this bill after heavy lobbying, right? He said that was in favor of the bill. And they call it a broad-based coalition. They say that who was in favor of the bill, we're talking about drug companies, physicians, and a group of parents that are concerned with injured children. So think about that. When will you ever see a time that those three things will be on the same side of this issue? Drug companies and parents of vaccine-injured children. Why are the drug companies in favor of this bill? Not because they want a compensation program for children, because they want to remove liability and not dip into their profits. So the truth is, the reason the drug makers wanted support on this bill was because they wanted the removal of liability. That is not the same reason that physicians and parents wanted this bill.
Right.
Physicians and the parents of vaccine-injured children, or parents that were advocates for children, they wanted this bill because they wanted a compensation program for those who were injured. Okay, so both things, being on the same side asking for support, were on support for very, very different reasons. I just thought, could you imagine a medical mandate where the pharmaceutical industry and the parents would be on the same side of this? Because we are very aware that when there is a bill in a state to remove exemptions, the type of people you see showing up in support of those bills are representatives of medical industry and lobby groups. They are not the average mom and pop parent. And then who do you see opposing? The average mom and pop parent, not big lobbies and industries that are, heavily funded. And so parents in pharmaceutical industries are hardly ever going to be on the same side of this issue.
But I wonder if they really were on the same side back then, because obviously the parents wanted the compensation fund, but not the, pharma being, removed from liability.
But it was a yes vote regardless to get either of those things.
So I doubt the parents were really I don't think they teamed up back then. I think maybe they're representing it.
No. I didn't think they were teaming up. I just think it's funny that you can put them in the same category of being in support of the bill. And so also funny. So like I mentioned before in the LA Times article, the HHS was not in support of this bill. This New York Times article talks about how the Justice Department was not in favor of this bill either. They had urged a veto of the bill because they didn't like the new system of compensating people injured by vaccines. And it's funny that President Bush was the vice president at that time and was involved in this and was a part of the concern for this. This is before they had implemented that tax on on each dose, like you said.
Yeah, but it's interesting. And now the Justice Department is the department in charge of litigating, defending the compensation fund and defending the vaccines. So they didn't like the bill, but now they're tasked with this huge role in defending it, which and maybe that's why they're being so awful in how they defend.
And we talked about that episode 59. If you haven't checked that out, please go back. That was our first episode of season 2. It's episode 59, talking about Dustin Barton and that particular vaccine injury case and the type of cruel and strong cross-examination that his mother received from the attorneys for the Judicial Department. This is the whole idea that they are supposed to be creating a program that is easy and helpful for these parents, and instead it is like do or die with them, that they will do everything in their power to make sure you do not win a case, receive a settlement. And if you do, they will do everything in their power to make sure that result remains confidential and cannot be used again, and they will seal records. This does not look like the altruistic injury compensation program that it was originally explained to be. Instead, it has become extremely cutthroat. We talk about that on that episode.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that more coming up with another episode. We're actually going to get even more in depth into the compensation program and hopefully give you an interview with another person, with a person who actually was involved in that program. Coming up. Anything else interesting in the article?
I mean, this article continues. So now here's the first time that the New York Times says this law sets certain limits on the manufacturer's liability in these lawsuits. That was the first time they kind of started to bring that to attention, but it was very minimal, right? And it says the congressional report says the purpose of the bill is to lessen the number of lawsuits against manufacturers. Not to protect injured children.
Right.
It is to lessen the number of lawsuits against manufacturers. And then they say, while compensating victims of vaccine injury. Again, it is a fact the way that they say it. They are compensating victims of vaccine injury. This is like, I know it seems so silly to get caught up on the words, but the words mean everything. And when you see the media today, they do not report these facts. Vaccine injury exists, period. You cannot deny that fact.
Right. Yeah. There were no vaccine injury deniers back then. Well, no. So in the medical community, they were completely denying that these vaccine injuries happen.
Even though data was showing they were.
Right. Yeah.
At that time,
there were tons of data showing, proving that these vaccine injuries are happening. But in the medical community, there actually was a cover up and a major denial about the DPT vaccine. But I'm glad to see, again, the media back then was telling the truth about it, even though doctors weren't willing to.
And like we talked about earlier in this episode, the other elements of this omnibus bill, one of them included exporting pharmaceutical products without safety testing. I found this really interesting that they said the bill ran into opposition from those who said it would be setting a double standard on the safety and effectiveness of drugs, meaning, you can go ahead and export this without really checking safety and effectiveness here in the United States before you do this. So people were opposing that, saying maybe that's not going to be the safest option. And it's just funny knowing what we know now.
I know, and it's amazing. I mean, if there's a part of a bill that's bad, why can't you just take that part out?
Right.
I mean, it's like everyone has this agenda. They need their part of the bill to be in there. And even though there's something that is clearly not in the interest of the world, this bill seriously, their foremost interest was the pharmaceutical companies. This bill did so much for pharmaceutical companies, and how can a government do that just out in the open like that?
Right, like listen to this quote from the president of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association, who said this new law, quote, greatly strengthens the ability of the United States pharmaceutical industry to compete in international markets. This absolutely was about building and inflating and pushing up the U.S. pharmaceutical industry. Right,
but the way he says it is interesting. The way he says it is in a way that all Americans are going to agree with is a good thing.
Strengthen.
Of course we want American business to be stronger and compete in the international market. Yeah. I mean, it's brilliant. And the media are not dumb. I mean, they craft these things this way specifically.
And think about how ironic it is that they're talking about how this helps increase the pharmaceutical industry while adding an element to this bill that is compensating victims of the pharmaceutical industry. Like these two things are side by side.
Yes.
We're going to help our pharmaceutical industry compete in international markets. We're also going to take care of those kids that unfortunately got hurt by those pharmaceutical products. But what we're not going to do is address why they are getting hurt by those pharmaceutical products. We're just going to set up a program and we're going to help our U.S. pharmaceutical industry skyrocket to the top of the global market. I mean, I find that so interesting to have two of these things side by side and nobody's batting an eyelash about why these people are getting injured in the first place, which is the thing that everybody should have been focused on, the primary thing. So yeah, that's the end of the notes that I have on this. I find these kind of articles interesting. And if you guys find some really great media articles from the 80s, 90s, I think I mentioned this before, send them to us so we can cover them on the podcast. Because I find this stuff really interesting. I find the way they covered vaccine injury and the way they declared it as fact, I find that refreshing. I also find that concerning that we've seen the change. And to anybody who believes this isn't real, go look up your LA Times and New York Times and you go show that to that family member and say, oh, it's not real. Then why was this on the front page or page 2 or 3 of the LA Times in 1986? And they admit right there in black and white that this is happening and something needs to be done about it. And this is just one example of that.
Yeah, and I'll close with you made a very nice graph. The graph where you showed how vaccine injury reports have gone way up and the reports of severe reactions have gone way, way up. You remember that the bottom end of your graph where it was very small? That was back then. That was this time. Like the 1980s is when they acknowledged vaccine injury and the numbers were actually a lot smaller.
Right.
Now has it tripled or quadrupled or?
Yeah, it's gone up.
I mean, the number reported every year is way more, and the denial has begun.
Right.
It's happening way more often, but everyone's denying it more and more, which is a huge problem.
As it becomes more and more frequent, it becomes more and more of a threat. Again, the threat to the pharmaceutical industry is the public's lack of confidence in the vaccine program. This is why they censor information. This is why they shut down the conversation. This is why they vilify parents. It's because if you know all of the truth, you will not be as confident to comply. And the thing that they are looking for is not to eradicate diseases. They are looking for compliance. It's just that simple.
Right.
They want you to sign on. They want you to say yes. And anybody that takes the time to question is going to be a thorn in their side that they want removed immediately. And they try to make examples of people, as you very well know, to make sure people understand, no, we're not going to accept that. We're not going to let you speak out about these things. Mm-hmm. And this is the crux of the issue. We should be able to talk about all things. This is a type of debate that's very complicated. It's complex. We need to be having this discussion with our people around us and on a bigger scale. Yeah.
So you're saying we should have the vaccine conversation.
We should make this a podcast.
Everybody. I know.
That's what we should do.
Right?
Have you thought of that?
Yeah.
Maybe next year.
Yes.
Huh? Fingers crossed.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah. Thanks, Melissa, for bringing this article. It was very fascinating. And so again, everyone, don't forget to, follow us on our Facebook page and, rate and review us, but don't forget the song you are now hearing in the background, fading in as I stop talking, that is Be the Peace, Melissa Suzanne, or Be the Peace, the Vaccine Conversation podcast, something like that. Download it, buy it, spread it, give it to your friends, and let's be the peace, that you want to see in the world for yourselves, your children, and we're fighting for our grandchildren too. So.
That's right. Very well said.
See you guys next time.
We're gonna be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, be the peace we wanna see in the world. Be the love we wanna see in the world. Be the joy we wanna see in the world. Be the change we wanna see in the world.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.